Welcome into Final Fantasy Occasionally. I am your host, Drew Kreisman. With me on the phone this time is my brother, Ira Kreisman, and we have parted ways after our conclusion of Final Fantasy XVI. So we are no longer recording in the same room as we were for the last several episodes, but we have completed the game. So this is your big, gigantic, enormous spoiler warning. Up front, right here, we're talking about everything in this one. This is a big, all-encompassing as we can be. I guess that's another warning. We're gonna miss stuff here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. We're gonna try to give our overall impressions. We're gonna try to dive into some of the biggest questions and conversations that we've been just having with each other since completing the game. I do want to begin, though, with Ira, that, not to get too autobiographical here, as we mentioned, it'd been a long time since we'd played one of these in the same room at the same time. But also that, I'll just say, at our age, that we played 65 hours of a video game in 4.5 days. This was an intense experience all the way around. So our, just kind of the atmosphere of us doing this was a hell of a lot of fun. It was pretty intense. It was honestly a little bit exhausting. It was.
And we even, we took breaks to not just go to the corner store and buy video game food, but we went and saw one of Kelly's friends who lives in Denver, right? So we went out to dinner a couple times. We did regular grown-up family stuff while also powering through the game.
Right. Yeah. It was pretty wild, to be sure. And both of our wives were absolute troopers.
Yeah.
And mostly enjoyed the game themselves.
Right. Yeah, they were into it. So not only have you and I not played a Final Fantasy in the same room together beginning to end in 20 plus years, but I've never really done that with my wife. She'll watch video games, she'll play sometimes, but she's not as into it as I am.
Sure.
And I'm not as into it as I used to be.
Right.
So this was a unique experience to have both of them and you all playing the game together. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. So it's hard to say to what extent making such an event out of it may have heightened some of the feelings and emotions of the game, especially a game where brotherhood, and we always know that family and found family are huge themes in Final Fantasy, so we weren't surprised by that. But particularly the core brotherhood of the story and of the themes is just, it all felt so, I don't know, specifically for us in that moment.
Yeah.
So obviously not going to be a lot of surprises here, but let's just start with top line takeaway. I know you don't do the ranking thing or even think about it in that way, the way that I do. So I'll do a little bit of that for people wondering afterwards. But just, how do you feel? What do you think? I know.
I feel lots of things. So how do I feel? Not any one way. I think it was lovely. I think it was brilliant. Lots of emotions. Most of them positive. And just as a story that has been crafted, and by a studio, not by a particular, a single author and their editors or whatever. I mean, what a ride! Really, really well done. I care for all of these characters. All these NPCs who live at the Hideaway, and then some of our friends who are scattered about the world. I have strong feelings for almost every single one of them, from Martha, at the inn in Rossfield, to Terrence and Medicine Girl, to the Desert Hare. All these characters, Theo and his sister, they all mean a lot to me, and their final fates mean a lot to me, and we don't necessarily get any sort of, our epilogue does not do here's how everyone's doing 1 year later, and that's probably for the best,
right? But
I feel I'm really glad we played the game. I want to play it again, but I don't have a PS5,
right?
And I feel mostly pretty satisfied.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Well, because there are these open-ended questions, and I know
Right.
the ending was pretty tragic, and so we'll talk about
Right.
that in a minute. But no, I agree, and I even sent out that tweet from the FFW account where I just named like as many NPCs as I could. I was just like, I love Gav, I love Martha, Theo, Blackthorn, Karen, on down the line, basically everybody at the hideaway. Right, and I was struck by the fact that I don't remember getting a single response that was like, actually, such and such character I thought was only okay, or I didn't care for. If anything, the more responses I got was like, where's Yote, man?
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah, Goots. Let's talk about Goots.
Yeah, people just wanted to add to the list. I don't think I had Terrence on my list.
Right.
And since we're going full spoilers, and I just brought it up, and I want to dive into like the end and big takeaways, but I do want to say, especially because we've been, making the Pride Month content on the YouTube channel and running through those, like we got our first canonical, no questions asked, no ambiguity, no read between the lines. There's just a gay relationship on screen, and it's beautiful, and it's tastefully done, and it's, just... Of all the things that this game gave us, it also gave us that, which I think was really, really cool. So, let's start at the end.
Yeah, let's start at the end.
We have a whole lot of specific questions here, but let's go with your reading of the end. I had somebody actually send me a DM the other day, essentially saying that they're not 100% convinced that Clive is dead. Or maybe that Joshua is dead. Right, but I think a surface level reading of the story is that Dion, Joshua, Clive go in as their icons and fight the final battle, sacrifice themselves, destroy the immediate threat, end magic from the world, and it's left for everyone else to pick up the pieces,
right,
and move on. And I fully accept and love that version of the ending, but I agree there are some loose ends that make you wonder. Could Clive, particularly Joshua in the book, I go straight to when did Joshua write that book?
Yeah, so let's talk about the epilogue. So the epilogue with the kids doing chores, and mom's in the kitchen, and he's starting a fire with a flint and steel.
Right.
Which is harder than with magic, but also nobody has to be a slave or be turned to stone in order to do it. And I remember being struck over and over again in the game how nobody knows how to do anything, like simple things. How do you light a lantern without magic?
Sure.
I don't know. We don't have matches, I guess. I don't know how to use a flint and steel, but like matches haven't been invented.
Right.
Which is interesting. I really like that. So the epilogue of doing basic chores by hand, no slaves, and here's this book credited to Joshua. Yeah. So did he write the book, or was he writing the book the whole time, and before he went off to the Crystal Tower with the other boys and died, or did he survive and get to finish it and publish it himself?
Right. This might be a good time to mention that we didn't do all of the very end game side quests because of the time crunch that we ended up on. We realized we were at the finish line. We were going to be able to complete the main story while you were in town, and we did almost all of the side quests before that. In fact, I think we did all of them. All the side quests before the very end of the game where they open up and we were like, yeah, we gotta go straight to origin, as it were. Right. So some of the big questions that we have may be answered in some of that side content. And that would be really fun to see and go back and kind of readdress that in a future episode. But for now... Yeah, I could see there being, even the way, Clive is there for just a moment on the beach before he tries to do the magic. And it's like, he could have survived, sure.
But he was turning to stone, right?
Right. Now, as far as any potential DLCs or sequels go, I'm not sure you can tell much of a sequel. I've seen a lot of people suggesting, and I think I agree, that if there's going to be DLC for this game, it should almost certainly take place during some of the time skips, or either be prequels or take place during some of those time skips where we can fill some things in, because I really, really do like, and we talked about, I guess, spoilers for one of the Super Nintendo games a little bit parallel here, but I won't even say which one. Those of you who know, that magic leaving the world is a really good ending for this story. And so I wouldn't want, a year later, Clive and Joshua are back on the trail fighting monsters with their magic and turning into icons again, right?
Right. Magic leaving this world is probably one of the most satisfying parts of the ending to me. There's bitterness, right, in the death of Joshua, Dion, and Clive, in that they all had things they still wanted to do, people they still love, people they left behind. And that's still a good ending. That's still an interesting, thought-provoking ending. But if there was a sequel and magic still exists, that would feel very strange. Yeah, I agree. I want to fill in some of those gaps. The 13-year time gap in particular. I'm not sure I want to play Jill there, because it seems like Jill's probably just being horribly treated in the Iron Kingdoms. I don't know. Maybe there's a way to do that.
Maybe I would want to do the 5-year time gap with Clive and Jill, where they were running around being secret assassins or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, that's where I think Jill could get a lot more. But I agree. I'm not particularly interested in just seeing Jill treated horribly. I was particularly, and we talked about it already, but boy, was her arc where she got to stab that MFer and not feel bad about it.
Yeah.
And not feel like, oh no, my revenge is hollow and I feel empty. Like, no, God, that felt great. Okay, let's go save the world. I loved it so much.
Somebody on Twitter drew the parallel between her and Inigo Montoya.
Yes.
Which I love.
Yeah.
I would love to see that also. If there could be a story of Jill in the Iron Kingdoms not just being treated awfully, I would love to see more from her, just because I feel like she does get sidelined a bit here and there. I would just like more for her to do, because I love her so much.
Yeah, I mean, there was clearly a relationship there with that nurse woman who right there could have been so much there. It's one thing the game does really well, where I don't need all of those relationships. Like, we talked about this a lot with Medicine Girl. It would be cool if she turned out to be somebody more, if we learned her name, or if there was a thing there. But I also just kind of love if she's just a random girl. Like, I love that.
And so I would like to see, even though Clive's 13 years would also be pretty grim, meeting the other 3 characters who we see at the beginning, the bastards. How does he meet them? Are there some adventures we could do with them? The ones I really want to see are Joshua and Yote going on quests to discover what Ultima is.
Yes.
I feel like Ambrosia and Torgal should get some chapters in that 13-year time gap. So absolutely. Ambrosia just wandering around the Rossfield Duchy, fighting off bandits and rescuing caravans, and Torgal going around and learning to be Fenrir.
I was going to say, maybe even Torgal has to go on his own self-discovery. Torgal will have to press L3 and R3 to accept the truth.
Sure.
and become Fenrir. Fenris loved that so much. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for more story told in this world, but I think it would be very difficult to do anything more after, unless you, like you were saying, it was sort of in that epilogue. Oh, and by the way, just so you know, Jill's okay. I think both of us really, as much as anything, wanted to see either Jill or, again, back to Medicine Girl, somebody moving on. I think that's the one thing maybe we don't get in the end. Well, the epilogue with the people who we've never met before gives us a sense that the world has moved on. But yeah, seeing Gav or Otto, or particularly Jill or Mid,
I feel like
getting to rebuild, as it were, would be nice.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like most of those characters are going to be okay, but Jill and Torgal are so connected to Clive and Joshua, and Ambrosia too, for that matter. I want to know that those 3 in particular, it's going to be hard. It's going to take time, but that they're not going to pine away for the rest of their lives.
Right.
That would be nice to know.
Right.
Speaking of extra chapters, Benedicta needs her own chapter. She was fantastic, and she dies too early.
And clearly an entire history there, right? And a whole history with her and Sid could be its entire own game.
Absolutely.
And a tragic one where we know at the end she's going to lose her way. But seeing her as somebody who Sid had all of the belief in, that Sid could, and being our moral guide through the entire story, that whatever he saw in her, we the audience, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that version of her. Yeah,
absolutely. Hey, speaking of Benedicta, since we're hopping around, we were questioning her motivations and also being with Barnabas.
Right.
Was that even real?
Ever? Again, it's not really clarified, but it's certainly hinted at, because the next time we see Barnabas in bed with Benedicta, it's not Benedicta.
Right.
It's Ultima. Which I immediately thought, I did the same thing you did. And I do think it's the conclusion we're supposed to reach, that actually she was never in bed with him. She may have been working for him or carrying out his plan or whatever, but I don't know. Again, it's one of those things where I think you can read it either way. The ambiguity in my mind adds to it rather than detracting from it. But because I'm choosing to be mostly pro Benedicta, my my read now is on, she was, I don't know if loyal's the right word, but she was down for Hugo, and she wasn't, it's funny because we even use that as a critique, and I've seen it out there some, that too many of the women in this story use their sexuality for, as a weapon or whatever.
Right.
But if Benedicta wasn't really ever in bed with Barnabas, then the only time we really see her being hypersexual is with Hugo. She used to have a relationship with Sid, but that's long over. People have ex-boyfriends.
Right.
Stuff happens. So as far as I can see, she was just with Hugo and doing her thing. So that makes her even more sympathetic, or whatever word you want to use there. Like, I don't even consider her a villain. I really don't. I put her much more in the category of characters like General Leo or Beatrix, characters who took lives and did bad things for bad people, but also weren't, at their core or whatever, evil. There's a long and wonderful traditional, history of that in Final Fantasy. I think she fits right in with them.
Since we're talking about Benedicta, can we talk about giant kaiju fights?
We can, and we should.
So I keep seeing this game described as medieval fantasy, Game of Thrones-like, and very grounded. And in some ways it is, but sometimes you fight a giant tornado monster. Right?
Yes.
And then sometimes you fight this giant earth monster in the desert with these frickin' tentacles, and you got to run up the tentacles and this and that. And then sometimes, it felt like, from Benedicta to Kupka to Dion, the kaiju fights just get bigger and grander and, oh my gosh, more amazinger. And I was thinking, after we fought Bahamut and went to space to do so, how are they going to top this for Odin? And then they didn't try to.
Yeah.
So I feel like the Odin fight, so all those are grand and sweeping and epic, and then the Odin fight becomes narrow and intense and philosophy in the rain with a sword fight.
Yeah.
And then we go back and then we fight Ultima in space near the red star and cosmic whatever.
Right.
So I loved the giant kaiju fights, cinematic clashes and so on. A+.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people talking about those, and I saw someone just today refer to it this way, basically saying these are those you'll randomly remember it 10, 20 years from now. Like, I went to space and fought Bahamut. Like, it was, and I agree with you. That fight in particular ramped up so intensely that I think 10 to 20 times out loud while it was happening, I said, this is insane. Like, I can't believe what's happening right now. Oh my God. Like, it was just one of those moments. And I was with you. I was like, I have no idea how they're going to top this for the rest of the game. And probably other than the final confrontation from an epicness standpoint, they don't. And like you said, they don't try to. In fact, the story, oddly enough, gets a little more quiet and personal up until the big epic ending after that, which I think was a smart choice. Like, I loved the pacing of the story, the way it would go from these big, you're fighting a mountain to, you're back at the small little hideaway running errands for, the normal people. I know some people didn't like that, but for me, that was a huge part of the pacing of it. And so, yeah, the kaiju battles are, I think, the high point of the game from that adrenaline hype. Obviously, things that'll stick out that you'll remember, type of moments. Bahamut was my favorite battle, if you will, of the entire game, with the final battle coming shortly thereafter. And the final battle was absolutely epic as well. I think it's just that we expect, and I've seen some people saying, by the way, there's some like, this game was good until halfway through when it went all Kingdom Heartsy.
Oh, come on. What does that even mean?
Well, Ira, it just means that Kingdom Hearts went all Final Fantasy 80.
All right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's that... Yeah, it's a frustrating thing, and we don't want to make this too much of that. But we expect, because almost all Final Fantasy final boss fights take place in the Nether Realm or the,
sure,
the whatever, right? Ambiguous space of wherever that thing at the end of 9 takes you to, or fighting the Cloud of Darkness, and, that's what we're used to. And so I think... I was ready for all of that, but the Bahamut thing surprised me.
Yeah.
And also the way that scene actually doesn't conclude with the... By the way, that's also where Clive and Joshua came together for the first time. So you're not just like epic monsters fighting each other, so much so that your fight gets so big it has to literally leave the planet. But it also had this beautiful... personal moment of the brothers becoming one, right? But then it concludes with the flashback of why Dion went nuts.
Yes.
And so it finishes with that scene, the way that was edited, rather than getting that first. We're having this epic battle and we don't 100% know why.
Yes.
And that just adds to it. And then, oh man, that was brilliantly done.
Yes, absolutely. Because Josh was on this secret mission to go see his old buddy Dion, who he met when he was a kid, and try to get the Empire to chill out. And it seems like it worked. And then Clive and Jill and Torgal show up and it's like, nope, it didn't work. And for a moment, it looks like Medicine Girl's about to die. It's like, Dion, what are you doing? No.
What are you doing? Yeah, and we're screaming, we're yelling at the screen. Dude, what are you doing?
What is going on? So then also, I kept wondering how Torgal was getting up ladders and stuff. And then suddenly we're traipsing across rooftops. Because I assume there's an animation issue, especially in-game, in the game engine, where you can't, it's harder to animate that sort of thing. But then we're getting some of these videos, and it's like, no, I can just jump up on the rooftop. What are you even talking about?
There were probably 10 or 12 times where we would ask questions out loud and then they would be answered in short order. Or sometimes the character would, in story, ask the exact same question.
Right.
That was a lot of fun.
That was great. So,
but yeah, when you learn how Dion accidentally killed his own father, like that whole scene. Oh, and then...
So a detail there that I want to point out is Olivier sitting on the throne of the Emperor.
Yes.
He's been playing with this toy of a king or emperor this whole time.
Emperor toy.
And then it's like, Emperor's being controlled. The boy is somehow puppeteering the father.
Yeah. Oh, that was a good reveal. Because I was ready for him to just be like a little pissant, Joffrey.
A Joffrey type.
Yeah.
And turns out he's Ultima, has been Ultima the whole time.
Yeah,
Did Annabella even give birth to him? Do they just think she did? But that also lends credence to the whole vessel idea, right?
Yeah.
Ultima's looking for the vessel, so can he take a vessel here and there? Yeah, man. Wild.
Annabella.
Yes, so let's talk about the end of the fight. Clive and Joshua, they hear a scream and they go into the room, and there she is, right? And so it's the three kids, now adults, Jill, Joshua, and Clive.
I knew where she was, I knew where they were, and still when you walk in the room and you see her, I went, oh shit, right.
And she's screaming at them, and she doesn't believe that's actually Joshua, and she's trying to shield Olivier from them.
Yeah. Oh man. The whole thing was really disturbing, and I can't believe she did it. I can't believe they did it. I can't believe that it ended that way. And again, not to do too much of addressing some of the whatevers, but if this was Game of Thrones, particularly the television show, that would have been incredibly graphic and horrifying. And maybe given me nightmares. But this was, I thought, as tasteful as you can show. I'm going to say what happened now out loud, by the way. So just showing a mother slitting her throat in front of her sons, taking her own life. Like, oh my God. It was tragic and horrifying enough so that there was a camera edit so that you just see her start to move the knife and you see her body drop. I thought, thank you. Like we said about the Benedicta and a box things.
Right.
You know, there were so many times where I thought they made the M rating tasteful.
Right.
You know,
it could have been deliberately more gruesome.
Yeah. And so I appreciated how tactfully that was done, but I was shocked. We went on a walk right after that scene. And I would say 50% still stunned and my body shaking from the battle with Bahamut that, did we mention, took us to space.
Right.
And the other half of it was, I can't believe she did that. I can't believe that was her ploy. That was the whole thing. And then that she couldn't just see her sons. Clive seemed indifferent, but Joshua reaching her hand out to say, it's okay.
Right.
We can be okay. And she, oh man, that stuck with me.
I am also glad that none of those three kids who were raised by her essentially was the one to do it. Maybe, well, because Clive and Jill were never treated well by her, but Joshua was. Joshua was the favorite. But still, to have one of them kill her would have been, I think, almost too much. So having her kill herself was stunning and tragic. I did want her downfall to be her own doing. I did not expect it to be that literal.
Right, it's usually like you cast a magic spell that misses and a bookshelf falls on your head. But no, this was... Man, it was intense. Speaking of intense, remember that part where we chopped off Hugo Kupka's hands?
Holy moly, dude. Holy moly.
I feel like there were so many little things like that I don't know, little Hugo's going, what do you mean little guy chopped off my... But there were so many things like that. It was like, oh, okay. And that's what I thought the M rating was really good for, but that...
Sure, yeah.
Wow.
That was super intense. And he could have just killed him there, but then the whole power sucking thing happened again, and he goes back to the weird liminal dimensional rift space that Ultima keeps pulling him to. So that was intense, and I really liked seeing the aftermath of that, and seeing Hugo Kupka be so pitiful in a way, and starting to feel bad for him. But then he shoves some servant, like, nah, F this dude.
Yeah.
I liked that a lot too. I thought that was well done.
Yeah, and the juxtaposition between how bad we felt for Benedicta when she thought she had lost her power versus Hugo, where there's a little bit of it there, and then, like you said, he just immediately makes you go, never mind, hell with this guy.
Right.
So yeah, that was all pretty fun and wild. Just wanted to mention a couple of those things. A few other things that I think are just in the category of holy shit. How about when Odin cut the sea in half?
Oh yeah, and then it stayed cut in half for a good half an hour or something.
That was amazing.
Holy cow.
Reminded me of, I'll just say, some stuff near the end of Final Fantasy X as well.
Sure.
And some Chrono Cross things. Actually, Chrono Cross has some scenes like that where the ocean sort of parts and magically sort of stays. But that was... Man, when we talk about spec fic and the things that these stories can do, and one of the reasons why I love Final Fantasy so much, and because it steps away from, again, it's like, we can say it's not as whatever as Game of Thrones because they didn't show the gruesomeness, they didn't show that, but also they're never going to cut the sea in half. And that's the other thing. The far more magical, the absolutely fantastical that you get from this series, and that was again an image that will stick with me for a very long time.
I also so we're talking about all these big moments. I want to make sure we talk about the little moments too. And as we often do, we juxtapose the huge and grand with the smaller moments. For example, Joshua punching Clive in the face after he takes Shiva's power. Because Joshua is now seeing this as, you're still trying to do this on your own. Have you never played a Final Fantasy game before, Clive? We do this as a team.
Right.
So I love that little moment. I loved, I can't remember her name now, the pregnant lady in Waloed. Mm-hmm. I thought that was fantastic. The Hope baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gav being so attached to making sure she gets out of there. All those small things are also, I think, really important. Speaking of a small, intimate moment.
Yeah.
Do we want to go to the beach?
Yeah, let's do that. Because, like you said, small, intimate, but certainly not unimportant. Maybe my favorite scene in the entire game.
What a thing. Because Joshua is mad at Clive for taking Shiva, but that's not really what happened.
Right.
Jill gives her to him.
Right.
Which was lovely, and we get this whole... So, throughout the game, every time there's an interaction with them, and it looks like they might be about to have a tender touch or have a kiss, they don't. Even from that very first balcony scene beneath the moon, not quite making a promise, Clive does not touch her shoulder.
Right.
So to finally get them to have a physically intimate moment where they're both soaked to the skin, they've taken their clothes off, there's a fire, and they start making promises, right?
Yeah.
It's so lovely.
Yeah, that they had on 2 occasions before that, and that we noted both times, that it really felt like he was walking up to the point of making her a promise under the stars. And you and I, throughout every time this happens in Final Fantasy, we make a huge deal of it. And that they walked up to the moment twice and didn't give it to us. And then, I don't know how it snuck up on me. I guess we were far enough into the game, at this point we're 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the way through the game. You figure, what is there left to promise? They're basically, this is the scene where they're naked next to the fire on the beach. I'm pretty sure it's finally going to happen, right? And they have a long conversation, and a very important one, about Clive not needing to do this all himself, but also needing the support of everyone around him, and her talking about her own journey as being a dominant, and there's like so much going on there. But of course the big payoff is that then he finally does make the promise to her under the stars that he'll come back, which he may or may not actually fulfill, which is super heartbreaking. But yeah, as far as satisfactorily paying off a love story arc, a promise under the stars, Final Fantasy tease, and then give it to me, and all of those things, and even really our first ever like fully naked Final Fantasy heroes conversation that will clearly lead into a sex scene. No, well, not a sex scene, because we don't see that, but I assumed they didn't stop at the kissing,
right?
But again, tastefully done, beautifully done. It was, the music was incredible, the performances were incredible, and it felt very, very earned. I think that's the one thing. If you're going to take us to a place we know we're going, I figured the second we saw them, the first Moonlight scene, like, oh, these kids are going to get together. They're so cute.
Right. Yeah.
And like you said, there are several times. There was one moment we were actually talking about in the Discord where they almost kiss and get interrupted by Gav, I think.
Right.
And everybody went, oh, come on. Right? So that they finally do get to have their moment, and that it's this good. It just, it was everything I want out of a Final Fantasy love story.
Which makes Clive slowly turning to stone on the beach that much more tragic. There's a bit of writing advice that goes, if you want your character death to be tragic, make sure to give them a goal that they cannot fulfill.
Right.
Right. Even if it's as small as, I want to go see the play, or I want to ride on the airship.
Airship, right.
So that Clive maybe dies on the beach by himself, and Jill feels it, or she feels the death of magic.
Right.
Is just that much more tragic. So yeah, it's bitter, but it's really well done.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about you don't have to do it on your own, because eventually Clive is on his own. Ultima rips itself from Joshua's chest and combines with all their clones.
Sure.
And Clive has to fight him on his own, except that, of course, we get the lovely callback to Final Fantasy IV, where before you can fight Zeramis, all your friends, your former party members, have to show up and cheer you on and heal you up. And so when Clive's delivering the last several iconic blows, he hears the voices of all these friends he's made along the way.
I am every Jedi.
So beautiful, so well done.
That was wonderful. That was... I got to be honest with you, even going into the final battle, I remember thinking at one point, we didn't get our Hymn of the Faith moment, or we didn't get our Final Fantasy IV everyone pray to the whatever moment, and that was it. That was our version of it. And yeah, there's still a part of me that would have loved the whole world coming together and singing a song, or whatever. But yes, that you're right, that probably as much for video game mechanic reasons as any else, Clive fights the final battle on his own, but he doesn't fight it on his own. He's got everyone, and not to mention all the powers of the people. Even Benedicta and Hugo are with him in ways, right?
And Barnabas and Dion, and absolutely. God,
we hear lots of voices. Elwyn, is there. That was got me in the heartstrings. Yeah.
I have a whole set of questions here that maybe we should just run through real quick.
Yes.
Are there icons outside of the 8 other than Ifrit and Fenrir? And do you think we'll get a DLC where we can go find Leviathan?
Yeah, that's the other DLC, I think, that's just the clearest, obvious one. They mention Leviathan the Lost.
And we're wondering the whole time, hang on, there's supposed to be 8. When are we going to fight Leviathan?
Yeah.
And so
not only that, but we know the elements that are typically present in the Final Fantasy games. We're like, who's the water? What is going on?
And at one point we went to the library and let's look up icons. Yeah, water's definitely mentioned. Where's Leviathan? Or maybe it's Bismarck. But then at one point Josh was like, not to mention Leviathan the Lost. Like, what do you mean not to mention? Hang on, we've been wondering this whole time, Josh. You couldn't have mentioned this.
Do mention. How about you do mention? And to what extent are things like Fenrir? Is Fenrir, all these other icons have an element. So what is Fenrir's? We fought Typhon.
Right,
What element was it? Did Ultima have an element, or was Ultima element-less? What the heck is Logos? Logos, that's something that's just sort of brought up and suggested as a whole other you're not Muthos, you're Logos, bruh.
Right.
I think there could be. They certainly open the door to. There are more icons than we know about. So that's another place where I think there could be plenty of good DLC if you wanted.
I was fascinated by the concept of Garuda's sisters. And being able to generate or sort of spin off these other characters and personalities, and then how that manifests in Lord Commander Sleipnir.
How fascinating was that? I loved this interpretation of Sleipnir. There are a lot of my favorite versions of Final Fantasy things in this game. My favorite version of Cid we talked about. And Sleipnir, not that there's, normally it's just the, horse with more legs. 6-legged horse? 8-legged?
Yeah, six. I think it depends. But definitely more than 4.
Yeah, normally it's not like Sleipnir gets a ton to do in most other Final Fantasy games, but what a fascinating character. And that, yeah, he was just a manifestation of Barnabas's power, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Really, really cool. An extension of Odin. That Sleipnir is an extension of Odin in that way. Oh, fantastic stuff. And those fights were really cool, actually,
right.
Now that I remember. Fighting a ton of him, that was a blast.
And Sleipnir being an extension of Odin is fascinating to go back to that early scene between the war party, right? But it's the Iron Kingdom fighting the
right.
Empire, or is it the Dalmatians? Right. So Barnabas and Benedicta and Sleipnir sort of arguing, and Barnabas not saying anything except Sleipnir is.
Yeah, he's speaking for himself through proxy. Yeah. Oh, man.
Wild.
Got to replay this whole game.
Yes.
Got to do the side quest at the end first.
Right.
All right. More questions.
More questions. Are Wade and Tyler Final Fantasy XVI's Biggs and Wedge?
Yeah, I think so. If I was to list, if I was to do the thing that seems to be very common and critique this game, not for what it is, but for how Final Fantasy it might be on a checklist of things I've got that are Final Fantasy, I would have liked to have seen actual Biggs and Wedge again, unless they're hiding in a side quest at the end of the game. A little disappointing, but Wade and Tyler work for me. I don't know why you wouldn't just name them Biggs and Wedge. They felt very Biggs and Wedgy.
They did,
Wedgy?
Yeah. Sure.
Wedgy?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, at least you've got characters like that.
Does Final Fantasy XVI support anarchism or possibly communism or both?
It certainly seems to support a kind of socialistic community. Is that
right.
communist?
small supportive communities.
Right. I always think it's interesting when these conversations, I think we try to draw these lines, right, that when a story says, hey, a thing might be a good idea, they're not suggesting that that's the only idea or the only thing, or they've got it entirely figured out. But I do think that it's clear that the main moral and ethical center of the story, Cid, and his legacy being passed on, and they say this out loud several times, we're carrying on Cid's legacy, right? That's precisely his philosophy. I wouldn't call it anarchism, because they do still have rules, and they do still have a general sense of you got to have, like, even guards and safety, right, and some things like that, right? But yes, it does suggest that it might be a better way to live, especially if resources are not endless, or rather even are pretty limited. That if we all pitch in, then we can all pitch in and we can all do a little bit better, and everyone can get, the same amount back. So, I mean, yes, they live on the Hideaway is a commune.
Right.
So, yeah.
But also, he's very deliberately against the Empire and against the systems that support it. Right, we got to tear down those mother crystals because it's the sucking out of the life stream that's destroying the planet.
Right.
So he would have absolutely kicked President Shinra off the top of the tower.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. There's I don't think in Cid's philosophy there's really any room for capitalism. Whether that means, you've got to go full on any of these other things, that's a big, interesting, and fun debate we probably don't have time to get into here. Some other time, I'm sure. It won't be the last time. I mean, it's Final Fantasy. This stuff comes up a lot. But, yeah, naturally speaking, when you say this way of one person at the top and the wealth being concentrated at the top, that's not working for me. What do I do? Well, I'm going to do the opposite of that, which is to try to spread the resources and the wealth and whatever we have out as equally as possible. That's
right.
Socialism. So, yeah.
There was another language being spoken at the beginning of the game, right?
A couple of times, yeah.
Where did that go?
Oh, that's a great question. I didn't even remember it. Maybe it's one of those things where there's like a Babelfish situation. They didn't really explain it, but at some point Clive just Maybe during one of the time jumps, Clive learns all the languages. That's why he can speak Moogle. I don't know.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because he can understand Nectar, and he's the only one. So was the other language only being spoken? I guess it was the Iron Kingdom.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be interesting. I just that's a thing I wonder about.
Yeah. I'll have to go back and check and see how present the other language is.
Are there other Moogles?
No idea. But I would think so. But doesn't somebody even say something about how Moogles don't exist at one point? And you're like, what?
Right.
There's one right there.
Right. So maybe it's Clive is dead, just like Squall.
There you go. He's the only one who can see the Moogle.
I don't agree that... You were telling me that there was an article somewhere that Jill just looks pretty. I do feel like Jill, I wanted a little more for Jill to do. I don't agree necessarily that the female characters are pushed into the background, but I do wonder, why weren't there any male courtesans? Like, I do feel like there was some opportunities to have a little more feminist of a view, a little more feminist of a lens that this game could have gone to and then didn't.
Sure.
I don't know. Would you have wanted to see? Would it have made sense? Would it have felt like trying to be too woke to have male courtesans?
No, I think it would have made perfect sense if they were there, while comparing to other mature fantasy stuff. To go back to the go-to comparison, I do think that's one thing that Game of Thrones does very well with its sex scenes, is it makes it clear that lots of people like all kinds of different things, and that it wouldn't make any sense that these places would only cater to one sexual preference, actually. So in a way, it actually makes a lot more sense that there would be male courtesans. Not something I noticed, I'll admit that for sure, but yeah, I agree with that critique.
Who put Benedicta's head in a box, or did it even really happen?
Yeah, again, I retroactively put all of the first half machinations at the feet of Ultima. It seems like he was manipulating everything to get the outcome that he wanted, so I assume him. At the time I remember thinking that it might have been Annabella, as she was, making her machinations and whatever. I still think that's possible. But you're right, we never do get a specific answer to that.
Which, if she's being manipulated by Olivier / Ultimecia, Ultima, there it is.
Sure. Same difference.
So I wonder then, could that be part of it? Did Olivier chop her head off and put it in a box?
Sure.
Or was it a vision like we know Ultima can do?
Right.
Is Medicine Girl okay, and did Terrence get that bag of money to her?
I'm going to choose to answer yes to both of these questions. Now, obviously, we don't see it. That's why you're asking. But I think because they made a point of it. There's that beautiful scene where Terrence is breaking down because Dion's basically telling him, Dion was the only one who knew for sure he wasn't coming back. Both Clive and Joshua were like, we've got stuff to live for. We don't want to go on a suicide mission. Dion was like, Terrence,
yeah,
I need you to take this money. I'm going to need you to get it to that little girl. So I choose to believe that because we've got the tragic ending, that Terrence isn't going to get to see Dion ever again, that at the very least he can fulfill his last wish. So I say yes.
In the same way that I'm worried about Jill, because she's so attached to Joshua and especially Clive, I'm worried about Terrence. Is Terrence okay?
Yeah. I mean, not okay, but he'll be okay. He'll be all right.
At the end, Clive uses the healing power of Phoenix to heal Joshua?
Yeah, or to just take away his scars.
Repair his body?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did the same thing, right? I was like, to what extent was that just to repair his body and so that his brother wasn't there as a kind of vessel to Ultima with like a literal hole in his heart.
Right. Oof.
So I get that too. But yeah, I was like, man, is he going to bring him back? But then, I don't know. So that goes back to our question of, do either of them actually end up surviving? And does Joshua get to write the book? If he does, I think that's the point where you would point to, right? You would say, actually, Joshua did survive because Clive was able to give the last of his magic, maybe, to give the phoenix down back to his brother and bring him back so that Joshua could write the book. But then in that instance, I think you'd have to go with the canonical explanation that then Clive definitely dies.
So oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, and that would also explain a little bit why he's starting to petrify. Because, we know that comes from doing too much magic. So, yeah, that would be an interesting read of the end of the story.
And we did see Kupka petrify after the defeat of Titan.
Right.
What's left of him.
Right.
So the last thing I want to talk about is Ultima and Ultima's plan.
Yeah.
Is Ultima an alien? Because they talk about, when they're revealing the big plan at the end, it's, we destroyed, we used too much ether in a previous land and destroyed it with blight, and so we come here to this pristine place, and it sort of seems like Ultima is Genova in that regard.
Yes.
How did they get there? Where do they come from?
How many others are there, and what do they do?
Right. So Ultima constantly refers to themselves as we.
Yes.
Is that because there are other Lunarians coming, right? Other Kryptonians coming? Or is that because they have split themselves amongst this planet in order to manipulate things to create the vessel known as Mythos that they can then inhabit to, subjugate everyone to their will? What is Ultima's plan? Is this like Shinra Corp wanting to go to the Promised Land thinking it's a literal place, except in Ultima's case it is a literal place that they can take over and suck dry, and then move on to the next?
Right. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of what Sephiroth says in Advent Children, right? Of basically like, I'm just going to use this planet as my vessel, as my, I'm sick of all this stuff that's here, and so I'm just going to wipe it clean and use it for my purposes. It was unclear to me what precisely those purposes were. Well, the Ultima and Barnabas talk a little bit about some sort of existence of pure logic, and
which might be the Logos.
And the deal they keep offering Clive and Joshua, is just give up your free will. You can come and live with us in this weird paradise, whatever. So they're going to wipe Valisthea clean, rebuild it, like you said, as some sort of promised land, where I suppose Ultima the alien and or its brethren, if there are any, or sistren, is that a word? It's other... Sure. Whatever other, and I agree, my interpretation is they're just uber powerful aliens. Maybe it's because I've watched too much Star Trek or whatever, right? But it's just kind of like, yeah, you guys are super advanced, highly evolved alien beings who screwed up your own planet and came to ours to try to play God, literally, to create a form of life. And we talked about this too, that we really loved this parallel, that you then abandoned. To their own free will. It was your fault, Ultima. Clive says this outright. You let us have our free will. You didn't tell us what your plan was. You didn't include us in any of this, and now we have it. And that's really the main central theme of the story, right? Is that human will, as achieved in a kind of vacuum, without guidance, without a surety of any particular divine plan, is in and of itself extraordinarily powerful and valuable. That it is, as Clive says, I can't remember exactly when, but he gives that speech about how, no, we're going to be bad at this. We're going to make a bunch of terrible decisions, right? We're going to fight wars. People are going to treat each other terribly, but we have to be able to make our decisions for ourselves.
I'm reminded of the end of Hitchhiker's Guide, where they're rebuilding Earth, and the guy says to Dent, "What do you want me to? Is there anything you want to change?"
Yeah.
and they think of all these things that you could change to maybe make it better. And he says, no, don't. The only thing that we're going to change is I'm going to leave. And admitting that we're going to screw it up again. It's not going to be perfect, but we've got to be able to make the decisions for ourselves. And I liked that one of the core themes seems to have been, Ultima says over and over again, you've tied your will to your consciousness, and that's proving to be a problem, and that's why we got to change you and change everybody, and that's what the Akashic are, right? Is they're sort of these ether zombies who have had their will removed. Right. But one of the reasons Mythos and Clive are able to resist is because of the bonds that he has, not only his will tied to his consciousness, but himself bound to these other people. That's why the side quests are so important. It's why it's important that he hears the voices at the end, why he's got a doggy who he loves and he can pet, why he's got a chocobo who can rescue him there halfway through the game, or at the beginning of the game, who he can then rescue halfway through the game. Yeah. It's
a
those
smile
bonds
that brought him joy. When he says to her, I never thought a smile could bring me so much joy.
It's beautiful. So we're not going to get it perfect, and we're going to make mistakes, but we can push through, we can survive, we can do better if we tie ourselves to each other. Yeah. Which was Ultima's mistake. According to Clive, says, you could have, we would have been on your side if you had tied yourself to us. If you had interwoven your life, your plans, your ideals with us, we might have been willing to help you. Yeah. But that's not what you wanted. And instead, you sucked the ether out of the planet, and you created the blight, and you created all this strife. And now we're going to have an ultimate space battle, you prick.
Because that's what we're going to have to do. And I am literally going to punch God in the face.
Yes.
And say, man, the number of times at the end he says, "Your God," and that's your thing, your belief. You're not a god. You're a bully. You're a tyrant or whatever. And then he just literally, for the final bit, after all that stuff, after all the fire and laser beams you could possibly handle, just right in the mug, the most Jack Garland punch God in the face and say, no, we do not submit. It really did feel like, I said it when it happened, right? It was some of the most Final Fantasy stuff ever. Remember that the final battle begins as Ifrit, Phoenix, and Bahamut fly into a crystal to face off against Ultima, which is a Final Fantasy-ass sentence.
Yes, it is.
But then all these things, it wasn't just, it felt like all of the Final Fantasies, it felt like all of the Star Warses, it felt like all of the Star Trekses, it felt like Wheel of Time, it felt like Lord of the Rings, it just, all of that stuff coming together in this grand explanation of why the hero won't submit, why the friends and the family and all the people of the world and everyone that mattered, and, despite the ugliness that we're directly shown throughout the game, the war, the death and the killing and the disease and the slavery, especially the slavery, and to stand at the end of all that and not say, so yeah, to hell with humanity, maybe you're right, maybe Sephiroth was right, summon the meteor, let's get out of here, to hell with it, because it's all garbage. You've got this guy who's been through all of this and says, no, we do not submit. We do not give in. I fight for Gav. I fight for Martha, and Torgal, and Ambrosia, Blackthorn, Jill, and Sid, and Benedicta, and Hugo, who might have been able to live completely different lives if not for this horrible cycle that you seem to have condemned us to. The burden of being a dominance and an icon, and to just stand up and say, we don't need you, we don't need your magic, We're going to live much more difficult lives, but they're going to be lives of our own making. Perfect. I know it's a tough word to use, and I'm saying the entire game was perfect. If you want to go listen to 17 minutes of us nitpicking it, you can do that too. We've got that. But man. So, since I know you don't really do this, and I know some people are curious, I'll just say, I sent out a tweet that said, this is the long and short of it. If you're curious about rankings and tiers, yes, for me, it's a top tier game. Yes, for me, I can't imagine ranking it any lower than my 5th favorite Final Fantasy, up there with 6, 7, 10, and Tactics. Right? It is, for me, it's in that category. But I think the way I put it right after we finished it, that is the biggest takeaway, because everyone's going to feel all kinds of different about all those games, right? Is that this was as good, as satisfying, as emotionally evocative as any Final Fantasy. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to reach out to us and let us know what we missed, got wrong, or should have mentioned. There will be plenty of time for more Final Fantasy XVI conversation in the future. In the meantime, if this is your first time listening, a special thanks to you, and I hope that you will consider a $1 a month subscription so that you can listen to all of our episodes on Final Fantasies 1 through 7 plus Tactics, and we are now somewhere in the middle of Final Fantasy 8. Huge apologies to you 8 fans. I know it seems like your game always gets the short shrift, and we had to put it aside here to talk about 16, but we'll be getting right back to it very, very soon.